This should be really quick. Sort of a response, jokingly, to some other talks that I've seen given here on using different frameworks. And so basic idea is don't use a framework. At least not always. So why would you want to use a framework like Backbone or Ember? There's tons of them. Because your code looks and feels like this, which looks awful. And so this comes out of my work. Actually, I had made this thing called Grumble. It's an open source Node.js chat service. It started as a Google App Engine app. I switched it to Node.js and WebSockets on the back end. But I had never refactored the front-end code. And it became this terrible 1,000-line client-side thing. You probably can't even really see it, but this is like one gigantic 1,000-line file. And it was awful. And so I decided to rewrite it in Backbone, because I had looked at Backbone. It seemed really cool. So I made some objects. I made a room object, a message object, et cetera, et cetera. And I needed to get the rooms to show the messages on the client side. But so I was like, OK, well, I can make one of these lists, because you can have lists in Backbone. And by the way, I'm sure that I was doing this wrong, right? But at the end of the day, the point is this wasn't obvious to me. So the thing is that these lists of messages are not really associated with the rooms in the database. They're separate things. We were going to pull the message separately out of the database. And I also don't want to re-render the whole list when I append a new message, because people append new messages all the time. They send a message to the room, and I just want it to go on the end. And also sometimes people will scroll up to the top, and they'll load more messages that are older, and you want them to go at the top of the DOM and not at the bottom. And so I kind of felt like this. Here's my framework, and it's trying to, it's like, well, here's how you do things. And I was like, but I don't want to do them that way. And so frameworks are fine, I think, if you use them from the beginning of a project, and if your problem maps well to their solution, right? If you're using the framework to solve the same problem that they were trying to solve when they made the framework, it'll usually work really well. But if you're doing something else, it's often not great. And if you're comfortable with them, if you've done 2 or 3 things with Backbone or Ember or whatever, I'm sure that would be the best way for you to go forward. And you'll feel like this guy. But so I ran into a brick wall with this stuff. I was not psyched to work on my code anymore. I felt like I was wrestling with Backbone. And I was kind of like, well, can I do something else where I don't have to use this whole framework, I just get to do a little bit. And so I started pulling pieces off the shelf. And I found Flatiron's Director.js, which it offers really nice client and server-side routing, not using it on the server side, just on the client side. Basically just send back an index.html, big slug, and then I just start routing everything on the client side. I modularized the code. I basically broke that whole gigantic file up into littler pieces and started loading them using lab.js, which is a nice parallel JavaScript loader. But if I wanted to, I could concat and minify. Use templating. LinkedIn's fork of Dust.js is really nice for doing templating in JavaScript on the client side and on the server side. And Twitter's Bootstrap. And now my code probably kind of feels like this, right? So it's not beautiful necessarily, but it's a lot better. It's broken apart. You can get to what you need to get to, and it sort of hangs together in a reasonable way. So you can check it out. It's grumble.com. It's also on GitHub. Feel free to fork it. And if you have any questions, now's the time.
I have a question as much as a statement for those who are repelled by this idea of none of these frameworks. There's a little language called Go that's getting some popularity, that the fundamental concept of the language is frameworks are evil and wrong and you shouldn't use them.
So I don't know. I should probably check out Go. But I've used frameworks in other cases, and they're good. But sometimes I feel like there's a little bit too much use of framework all the time.
What would you say the three greatest efficiencies you gained out of this over the Backbone?
I'm sorry, the 3 biggest
efficiencies. What did you find that created the greatest efficiency?
Right. So, right. So the biggest thing for me on this is just like when I was trying to effectively fit my problem into Backbone, I felt like I kept hitting walls. And it just made me, this is a side project, right? This isn't something I'm getting paid to do. This is just something that I do for fun. And I wasn't having fun anymore. And so I took a step back and said, do I really need a whole framework that I need to make my entire application fit into? Or can I just pull some pieces off the shelf that will help me break it apart and make it a little bit easier to work with?
I guess that's what I'm asking. What would you say the 3 best pieces that you pulled away from that, or that you constantly find yourself using? So
I like Director.js on the client. It's a really nice way to basically handle views on the client. I mean, I'm not sure that I can give you a breakdown. I wouldn't say that this would work for every project, but I'm sort of saying, especially projects that already exist and aren't using a framework, sometimes it's not the best idea to try and jam them into a framework. Okay, on that note, thank you very much.